I don't know about you, but I'm fascinated by the things that the blind are able to do. Things that you would not even know they had such a disability. From being able to play the piano better than anyone you've ever heard play the piano, to painting masterpieces, to golfing hole-in-ones on a golf course. I've played a lot of golf, and I've never come close to a hole-in-one, but I've seen a blind person do it. Wow, amazing. Who, though, as amazing as that is, would ever choose to be blind? Imagine that. Imagine if you could see today and say, yeah, you know what, I'd rather give up this gift of sight. And what the consequences would be. You'd never drive again. You'd never see a sunset or a sunrise again. You'd be able to hear the television, but you wouldn't be able to watch the Badgers come back from 15 down last night to beat Oregon on TV. What a great thing that was to see for us Badger fans, but never be able to see that again. Who would give up the gift of sight? I doubt many would. Well, all of us, like that blind man in the gospel reading for today, came into this world, at least spiritually speaking, totally blind from birth. You go back to the days of Noah and you hear God say about those people at the time of the flood, every inclination of their heart was only evil all the time. And that was us too. And to be honest, if you were God and if I was God, and knowing the things we've said and done and thought, would you make a whole bunch of sacrifices to save people like us? I don't think I would. But thankfully, I'm not God. And He did. And purely out of His grace, He took up our infirmities and He carried our sorrows. And the punishment that brings us peace was upon Him as we celebrate during this Lenten season. And He took our blind hearts and He turned on the light of the gospel through water and the word at holy baptism. He showed us the way through His Son, Jesus Christ. And now, He says, live like you can see. One way to thank me for what I've done for you is to be the person I've made you and to walk as a child of the light every day. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 8 through 14 is what we're going to focus on this morning, our second lesson, and focus especially on that fact, what it means to live like we can see. I encourage you this week, read the book of Ephesians. It's not very long. It's only 6 chapters. Start tomorrow. Just read a chapter a day. You'll be good through Saturday, back here Sunday morning, and I guarantee your faith will be stronger for it. It's 154 verses. It's not going to take you a real long time, and it's split very nicely into 2 sections. The first 3 chapters, God's plan of salvation, began in eternity when He chose you and Him before the creation of the world, carried out in time through the work of Jesus, with results into eternity for those who trust in Him. Probably the most famous verse of that first 3 chapters is chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, right? For it's by grace you've been saved through faith. And this is not of yourselves, it's a gift of God, not by works, so that no one may boast. Sums up very well the first half of Ephesians. Then the second half, chapters 4 through 6, okay, you're saved by grace through faith, and it's not by works, not by anything you do, but that doesn't mean the Christian doesn't do anything. And he talks about our different vocations in life, whether you're a husband or a wife or a child or a parent or a boss or a worker, whatever it may be, and different ways you can live like the people God has made you. And he talks at the end of the book about how this happens, putting on the full armor of God, right? The helmet of salvation and the breastplate of righteousness and the belt buckle of truth, and how our real enemy isn't against flesh and blood. No, it's against the devil and all his wicked angels who want to pull us down into hell with them. It's just an excellent faith-building book, and like I say, you'll be definitely better off for it. Chapter 5 says this: you were once darkness. And notice he doesn't say you were once in darkness. This is how bad it was. You were darkness. But now you are light in the Lord. total transformation. You ponder that concept of darkness and blindness. Imagine a spelunker, a cave explorer, right? And he comes across a cave that looks as if it perhaps has never been explored, and he decides to take on the challenge, and he puts down his stake that he's going to tie his safety rope to, and he begins his journey into the cave. He hasn't told anybody because he doesn't want anybody to beat him to it. So he takes his backpack with his food and water, and he's all tied up, and he's got his flashlight with some extra batteries, and in he goes, and he goes deeper and deeper. And what's going to happen very quickly? No more natural light, right? No more sunlight. The only light he has is the light, artificial light with him, and his flashlight. And deeper and deeper and deeper in he goes until eventually the safety cord is at its end. And yet around the corner, he sees a glimmer of something. He shines his light on it. What is that? Well, curiosity gets the best of him, and he unties his rope, and he puts his backpack down, and he takes his light in there, and he sees all the treasures that you could ever imagine that the world can offer. Gold and silver and jewels and diamonds, and he looks, and it just goes on for yards and yards and yards, and he goes deeper and deeper, and he can't imagine what he's just found, and this is all his. And then all of a sudden, flicker, flicker, flicker. The flashlight dies. The battery is dead. And he starts hyperventilating, right? He gets nervous. He's now in the middle of darkness, and he can't see. And he's left his safety rope 50 yards behind him, and he's going around, and he's tripping over rocks, and eventually he falls down, and he dies. And he's found years later with his hands clawed into the ground, reaching, trying to find that rope again. But he never found it. Was it worth it? Friends, if you ever want something to pray for, one of those nights where you just say, I don't know what to talk to God about, maybe you know some stories like that. People who had faith in their infant hearts. People who sat in Sunday school or CBC every week and sang Jesus songs. People who sat up here at another church on Christmas Eve and could recite the whole Christmas story. People who came to Easter breakfast and took home an Easter lily and swore to God at their confirmation day that they would rather die than give him up. But eventually, they held on to the pillow tighter than Jesus. They held on to their family or their job or the riches of the world tighter than Jesus. And they lost that safety rope. Maybe that was your story, and by the grace of God, you found it again, and you're back. Maybe it might be the story of someone sitting very close to you this morning, if we're not on our guard. St. Paul tells us, live as children of the light. For the fruit of the light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. He says, be who you are. Live as a child of the light. You break those things down, goodness, righteousness, and truth. Goodness, basically just doing what is beneficial for others. You think in a given day how many opportunities you get to be a benefit to someone else. And it doesn't have to be these great, glorious, look at what I've done works that the Pharisees would boast about. Holding a door open for someone, what a benefit. Having a smile on your face in the hallway to brighten someone's day, goodness. Helping out someone in need when you have an overabundance and they have not as much, goodness. He talks about righteousness here. Actions that conform to God's attitude. Actions that conform to God's standard. Watching the movie, and it gets to the point where it's really beginning to make a mockery of God's name and the gift of sex and promoting violence, I hit stop, right? What does light have to do with darkness? What do we have in common? Why do I even want to be watching this stuff? That's righteousness, right? Living like a child of the light. He talks about truth here, living in truth, more than just not lying to people, but It's my whole life. It's backing up. It's not just talking the talk, it's walking the walk. It's not just the Sunday morning Christian. It's truly when people look at me, no matter where I am, they see Jesus living that life of truth. He says, find out what pleases the Lord. Very literally, I want you to approve of the things that please the Lord. In 1 Thessalonians, Paul says, test everything. Hold on to the good. Avoid every kind of evil. That's pretty strong, right? Avoid every kind of evil. Don't even be associated with it. Just stay away from it. But the devil, for thousands of years, has been fooling us, hasn't he? Maybe when he says test everything, it's easy to lessen the standards of the test. It's easy to say, well, how am I supposed to avoid every kind of evil? Isn't that impossible? So I'll just associate with it a little bit. And the standards get lower and lower. And the conscience can become a little more seared and seared. And before you know it, here I am standing in the midst of it if I'm not on my guard. Find out what pleases the Lord. Avoid every kind of evil, having nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness. Rather, expose them. Fruitless deeds of darkness. Sin never has a benefit. It's fruitless. It's like a dead branch. You think of the 13-year-old girl. There she is weeping uncontrollably. She's just found out that one of her parents had an affair. She's at this fragile age already in life. And the two pillars that she had as her rocks, and in spite of all the other emotional disturbances that there are in the world, now this is broken too. And the fighting and the arguing and the turmoil in the house. And now she's at the age where she's going to start dating, and will she turn to the first guy who gives her attention because she wants a male figure in her life because she only sees dad half the time? And you look back and you maybe ask the question, was the affair worth it? For those few minutes of pleasure. Fruitless. Right? The parent who's passed out on the couch holding a half-empty bottle of alcohol because there's just so much stress in their life. And the child's crying and another one's hungry. Is that drink really worth it? Really? And maybe say those are extreme examples. Any sin, the guilt we feel, the shame we feel, and you ask yourself the question in hindsight, was it really worth it to have something to do with those deeds of darkness, or was it fruitless? Isn't it always fruitless? Paul says it's shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret. You know, it's shameful that we even have to sit here and talk about and think about things like child pornography. What a shame. It's shameful that we have to turn on the news and hear about churches getting robbed. It's shameful that we have to turn on television and see how vile it has become, that this entertainment, people will pay money to watch other people get murdered, or to sleep with people who aren't their spouse, or to throw God's name through the trash. Is that worth $12? And yet, maybe what's most shameful of all is the time I've gotten just as comfortable with it as anybody else. And maybe you have too. And like we said before, it just becomes what people do nowadays. And if that's the way it is, then that's just the way it is. And forget when Jesus says, yeah, you may be in the world, but you're not of the world, are you? You see why Paul in Ephesians starts out the first half of this book with justification. By grace you've been saved through faith. And he doesn't want us to forget that. For the times we have chosen to go back to blindness in our sin, he says, remember that you're saved by grace. Not by what you do, by what Jesus has done. But now, in view of that mercy, what's your relationship with Jesus? Is he just an acquaintance? Or is he a friend? Is he just an acquaintance, or is he a big brother? I remember growing up, I'm 7 years older than my sister. She wanted to emulate me more than anything in the world, and it was so annoying. Everything I did, she was right there at my hip. Literally everything. If I did this, she wanted to do that. If I did that, she wanted to do that. They get away from me. But you think in hindsight, what an honor, right? That someone wants to copy everything you do, that someone wants to emulate you, and ask the question to you and to me, is that how we feel about Jesus? Like this great big brother. And we look at him and we say, Lord, I want to be at your hip everywhere I go. And I want to do everything you do, and I want to say everything you say. Lord, you just lead, and I'll follow. Isn't that what it means to live as a child of the light? To be like Jesus? And it's not easy. I mean, let's be honest. We still have that sinful nature in us who hates God, literally hates God, and we have that part of us that would rather gouge our spiritual eyes out and go back to darkness. Yeah, you know what that feels like when that struggle's happening inside of you. But then you turn back to the cross, and you thank God for having opened your eyes to the light. It's not in my eyes this morning. I don't know what happened. Usually I'm opening your eyes to the light and saying, Lord, lead, I follow thee. You think of that hymn, how it ends. Jesus says, I gave my life for thee. Come give thyself to me. So that being said, Christian friends, in view of God's mercy, let's offer ourselves as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God, through the blood of his Son. Amen.